Hello, I'm Katie Stroud with IAB Tech Lab. I would like to thank Geste and specifically Xavier Filion from Radioline for inviting me to present our upcoming updates to the podcast measurement guidelines. I would like to start about a year and a half ago when we embarked on what to include in the guidelines. And a big topic of discussion at the time was the discrepancies that companies were seeing between other companies. So we started to collect data and trying to set some kind of technical threshold that would help. But the deeper we got into that process, the more we realized that there are too many factors to consider setting those kind of thresholds. So that's when the story shifted to instead describing the factors that cause discrepancies. And so I was working our notes into the next update and comparing and discussing with our members specifically around how the shows that a company hosts might contribute to discrepancies. And that's when I was corrected. It's not that the shows that a company hosts causes discrepancies, it's that the second company bringing a complaint to the first says that these numbers don't match, but when you look at the numbers for the same shows, then they do in fact match. It's just that the first company would come with a variety of shows on their numbers, and shows have different popularity. So if you want to compare numbers, you have to compare to the same show. And that's just one example. Things like the date range, the time of day, the time zone that you're in, the geographical location, all of these contribute to what numbers you can pull. And if those factors don't align, then yes, you will see discrepancies. In fact, a download for an episode in France at 9 a.m. is going to be way different than any downloads that occur in Seattle at the same time because we're all asleep, not downloading any podcast. So those are really important. And this issue is a big problem, first of all, because the fact that the initial complaints brought to companies are resolved in the end don't really matter. People mostly see that there's these complaints every month. And so it looks like there's all these discrepancies. The second problem is that hosting companies will engage in the same back and forth conversations month after month, all to say, make sure you align your report filters before you start comparing numbers. And so that's actually going to be an important part of our next update. We'll have a checklist that explains different parameters that you need before you start to compare numbers so that you get the same thing that another company will get. In fact, discrepancies used to be a really big issue. It was, you could have numbers twice that of another company. And it wasn't until we released the podcast measurement guidelines in about 2016 and then subsequently the compliant program that you don't see discrepancies between companies that are more than about 5%. And that's better than what we ask of most of our members. So that's going to be included in the podcast measurement guidelines, and we hope that it will save everyone a lot of time to look at the numbers the right way before making any complaints. And then the other things that we'll be including in those guidelines is some information about how fraud occurs, some details about performance measurement and how that happens, as well as some player updates for signals that include privacy signals, as well as we think maybe a signal that indicates whether a download is being stored or actively listened to. We're not sure if we can support that just yet. But I would like to say that going back to being certified, since our release of version 2.2 about 2 years ago, more than half of all of the companies that go through compliance have updated to the latest version, and we expect to see, and that includes all major hosting companies, and we expect to see everyone updated by end of year. So that's if you're interested in participating in these meetings, I know the time difference can be a little difficult, but members have access to meeting notes and the documents that they can review and comment on in their own time. And speaking of review, we plan to release our next iteration of updates for public comment by mid-year. So be keeping an eye out for that because we would love your feedback. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can email support at iabtechlab.com. Just put podcast anywhere in the subject line, and that will work its way to me. So thank you again for having me. I look forward to working with any of you that are interested on podcast measurement.